We've been in a series on Sunday mornings called On the Road with Jesus, and we're continuing that with the message tonight. I was thinking about it because I was talking to a young person in our church recently. We're tremendously blessed to have so many young kids, teens in our church. It's such a blessing. And they're just getting going on their life journeys. And I find it fun to ask them what their plans are for their future. And some don't know, but some have very detailed plans. They've got it all figured out. And I try to remind them that while it's good to make plans, it's also good to expect the unexpected. Only 30% of college graduates end up in a career that was related to their major. And I know that from personal experience, and I'm sure many of you do as well. Life's road can have very unexpected turns. But we're here tonight to talk about Jesus' road. And the dreams that he had when he set out on it. And his dream was not to have a good career and a nice house. He did not foresee settling down with a wife and having a bunch of kids. He didn't plan to make a lot of money or have servants waiting on him. No, from the beginning, Jesus' plan for his life was to lay it down. And his journey, what we've been seeing in the previous Sundays, it was all headed toward Jerusalem, where suffering awaited him, betrayal, abandonment, an unjust trial, and crucifixion. And so tonight's message is called The Path to Calvary. Calvary is just the Latin word, which is the name of the hill where Jesus died. It means skull. And it was called Golgotha, the place of the skull, because the features, it kind of looked that way. Even though Jesus didn't lift the heavy cross onto his shoulders until he was dragging it up that hill where he would die, in reality, he'd been carrying it all along on his way to Jerusalem. And so let's briefly walk with Jesus along that path tonight, the path to Calvary. Number one, the path to Calvary was a determined road. And we saw this a couple weeks ago, in a Sunday morning message, that Jesus was eager to get to Jerusalem, even though he knew what was waiting for him there. Mark 10:32 and following says, they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. They knew the risks. And it says again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. We are going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. He was so determined on this path he was on because this was his mission. This was why he came. The ancient Hebrew scriptures had foretold his coming all through the Old Testament. Not only his coming, but his suffering. In Genesis, he is the one who would crush the serpent's head, but his own heel would be struck in the process. In Exodus, he is the unblemished lamb whose blood causes death and judgment to pass over. In Leviticus, he is the sacrifice, for without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. In Numbers, the book of Numbers, he's the one lifted up so that all who look to him might live. In Deuteronomy, he's the prophet greater than Moses, whom we all must listen to. In the Psalms, he is the righteous sufferer whose hands and feet are pierced, whose garments are divided. In Isaiah, he is the suffering servant, pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. In Zechariah, he is the one who is pierced, the shepherd who is struck, and the king who comes to save. All of these prophecies and many more pointing to this Messiah, and all of it was pointing to a road that led to a hill called Calvary. Jesus was determined to get there. Secondly, it was a surrendered road. When Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, the crowds saw a king. But Jesus, he wasn't thinking of a throne at that point. He was focused on the cross. Every step he took was not toward a throne, but toward crucifixion. A throne toward crucifixion. There would be a throne. It would be later after his suffering. At the Last Supper, he gave his body. When he said, "This is my body," he took bread and gave it out. Before it was taken from him, this was something that he was surrendered to. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." He chose surrender, knowing full well the agony he would experience. And when that time came, he did not flinch. He was surrendered. And then it was a silent road. He was betrayed and abandoned by his closest disciples. No one stuck by his side to encourage him. He was falsely accused, but he remained silent. He didn't defend himself. Matthew 26. Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. Even before King Herod and Pontius Pilate, he was largely quiet. This fulfilled prophecy. Isaiah 53:7. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Pilate looked to the crowd and said, "Well, what should I do with Jesus? You want a criminal released instead? You want Barabbas? What should I do with Jesus?" Matthew 27. What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." What a contrast. The crowds loud, shouting. Jesus silent. Then he was beaten, handed over to be crucified. And that brings us to the next point. It was a substitutionary road. He was now on the final leg of his journey. Everything in his whole life and in history past leading up to this, he's walking up the road to Calvary, carrying his cross. It is a road that only he can walk. No one else is worthy. No one else is righteous. Jesus alone is qualified to take the sins of the world upon himself. The scripture is clear. We have all sinned. We've all fallen short of God's glory. Those black pieces of paper, just a reminder that that was the condition of our hearts spiritually. God says that our righteousness was like filthy rags before him. But this was the moment Jesus had aimed for. This was his life mission, laying down his life for sinners. 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. I just have to read that one more time. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Talk about substitutionary. Our sin got substituted for his righteousness. He took the sin on himself, and then his righteousness got substituted for our sin. We get his righteousness if we believe in him. He was willing to do it because he loved each and every one of us. And then he endured, even as he was hanging on the cross, terrible mockery. And so the final point here, a mocked road. People didn't understand what he was doing. They didn't understand the depth of his love, that even as they ridiculed him and hurled insults at him, they didn't understand what he was doing for them if only they would look to him. The religious leaders were mocking him, the soldiers, the onlookers, even the two criminals about to die on crosses on his right and left, they were mocking him. If you're the Christ, save yourself and us. They were all mocking Jesus for not saving himself. But the reason he wasn't saving himself was because he was focused on saving others. As all of this unfolded, one of the criminals on a cross next to Jesus experienced something very powerful, actually life-changing. And at this point, I'd like to welcome him to the stage to tell his story.
I never thought it would end like this. Nailed to a Roman cross, just outside Jerusalem, waiting to die. I didn't deserve this. The world was cruel to me, and I did what I had to survive. Romans, what hypocrites. They're the real thieves. They took our land, our money, our hope, our dignity. So I took something back. At first it was small. Food, money, supplies. Then it became easier. Then it became normal. If a man resisted, you hit him. If he still resisted, you made sure that he wouldn't again. I discovered a brotherhood in that life, together with men who lived outside the law, men who answered to nobody. By the time that I was 20, I found myself running with a gang of Sicarii, the knife men. We told ourselves that we were fighting Rome, that we were patriots, that the rich deserved it when we took from them. That's the road that led me to that day. To the place where I found myself hanging between heaven and earth, or earth and Hades, with blood on my hands and no way out. I had seen men crucified. I knew what it was. Pain. That's it. That's all there is. Pain and the effort to manage it for just one more second. Well, gasping for just one more breath. Pain and the faces of the crowd below you. Some of them weeping, but most of them just watching. The way people watch a fire. Curious. Safe. Just glad it isn't them. They called it Golgotha, the place of the skull. They put 3 crosses up that day. Me on one side, the other man on the far side. And in the middle was him. Jesus of Nazareth. I had heard the name. Everyone had heard the name, the teacher, the healer, the one some were calling a Messiah, a king. I didn't pay much attention to that kind of talk. Every few years, someone came along claiming to be the one, and the Romans crushed him, and that was that. And here was this one, hanging exactly like me, every bit as helpless as me. Not much of a king. So when the onlookers started mocking him, "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself. Come down from that cross." I joined in. Of course I did. Cursing at someone felt like the last bit of power I had left in the world. The other criminal was doing it too. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself." And us. But then Jesus spoke. I had heard men die. They curse, they scream, they beg. But this man, he looked out at the Roman soldiers, the religious leaders and the mocking crowd, and he started praying for them. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Forgive them? Forgive the men who beat him? Forgive those of us who had been mocking him? Forgive the ones who drove the nails? I had never heard anything like that, not once. And I started to feel something move inside me, something I didn't have a name for. Like a crack in a wall I had been building my whole life. But others were still mocking. The religious leaders, men devoted to teaching God's law, were sneering. They seemed happy that Jesus was now out of their way. I looked back at him. The soldiers were offering him some numbing drink, and he refused it. He refused it. In all of that agony, he chose not to dull the pain. He wanted to be present. He wanted to stay awake. And then he looked down at his mother. She was standing near the cross with this terrible grief on her face. And he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." To the disciples standing beside her, "Here is your mother." He was making arrangements. Even then, taking care of her. That crack in the wall got wider. I started to think of the charges against me. Every one of them was real. I had done what they said. I belonged on that cross. But Jesus, there wasn't a doubt in my mind that he was innocent. Not only innocent, but the very definition of goodness and holiness and love, hanging on a cross, dying next to me. I began to feel ashamed for mocking him. So when the other criminal hurled some more insults, I couldn't take it anymore. Something snapped inside of me. "Don't you fear God?" I said. "We are punished justly. We are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I saw myself clearly. Not as a victim, not as a rebel, but as a sinner. I had spent my whole life separate from God, disobeying every command, ignoring his will for my life, and now the distance was too large, the debt too great, the record too long to ever settle. The sky began to grow dark and ominous. But I saw the light. He was on the middle cross there next to me. And in that moment, my heart finally cracked all the way open, and I believed. I don't know how, but I knew what to do next. I turned to him and I asked, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And I know that it made no sense. A dying man asking another dying man to remember him in a kingdom, unless he really was a king. You won't believe what he did next. He turned to me through the blood, through the pain, and he looked at me not with disgust, not with anger, but with compassion and mercy. And he said to me, "Truly, today you will be with me in paradise." Today, not someday, not if you clean yourself up and find a way to earn it. Today. And you will be with me. Not you'll make it to some far place alone. You will be with me in my presence, in my company. He knew everything about me. He still said yes. In that moment, the weight I had carried for years was lifted. I felt a peace that I had never known. A peace that told me that God had accepted me. Not because I had fixed my life, I couldn't. Not because I had made things right, I hadn't, but because Jesus promised to remember me. Then darkness fell completely. The sky itself seemed to mourn, and I heard him cry out, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." and he breathed his last. Not soon after, the soldiers came along and broke my legs to speed up the process. I could no longer push myself up to breathe, and my lungs began to fail. The world grew dim. But I wasn't afraid, because I believed him when he said to me, "Today you will be with me in paradise." My last breath left me, and the first face that I saw was his. The radiant, glorious King, Jesus. I had no time to change my life, no time to right my wrongs, no time to prove that I was worthy. I had one thing: faith in him. And now I'm speaking to you today. You sitting here tonight. You who maybe have heard this story so many times you've forgotten its power. You who maybe came in tonight carrying something so old and so heavy that you stopped believing anything could ever lift it. I'm here to tell you something from the other side of that cross. There is no debt too large. There's no record too dark, and there is no distance too long. You are not out of reach of his kindness and mercy. So, remember my story. Remember Jesus, and trust him to remember you. All you have to do is look out towards him and ask. Thank you.
Oh my. Thank you, Sam. Sam was in a production in theater at Saugus High last year and did a great job. And tonight he offered his gift to the Lord to be used, and God did use you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your love. Just thinking about it, that Jesus, he walked a road, took a path, and so did this criminal, this thief. He walked a very different path. And those two paths converged on Calvary. And in that place, that criminal put his faith in Jesus, and his eternity was changed in an instant. And I just want to have us go before the Lord right now and say whatever you need to say to him right now. If you have never done what that criminal did and put your faith in Jesus, set your eyes on him and say, Lord, remember me. Lord, save me. Do that right now. And if you did that long ago, just take this time. If there's something you need to renew between you and the Lord, or if you just want to worship and thank him in this time, let's just do that.